Go ahead, sir.
Okay, this is the Board of Directors meeting, regular bi-monthly meeting for February 15th, 2022. Can I get a motion to, well, it's a roll order and roll call. Roll call.
Oh, I'm sorry. Director Bregman,
Here.
Director Gibson,
Here.
Director Kohler,
I'm here.
Vice President Schmidt,
Yep.
and President Russell.
Okay, I need a motion to adopt the agenda.
Move approval of the agenda.
Second.
Roll call.
Director Bregman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Kohler,
Aye.
Vice President Schmidt,
Aye.
and President Russell.
Aye. And do we have any public comment on the closed session?
I see one hand raised. That's Mimi Willard. Go ahead, Miss Willard.
Yes, good evening. You can hear me?
Yes,
Loud and
ma'am.
clear.
Okay. So in tonight's closed session, MMWD's outside counsel will ask you directors to green light contesting a January 31, 2022 Marin Superior Court order requiring disclosure or discovery of information related to the establishment of meter size based charges that were implemented in 2019. In a class action lawsuit, Cost has asserted that MMWD's approach violates California law, which requires that water rates be fairly and proportionally assessed across ratepayers. For over 2 years, MMWD has fought discovery, which is to say, has refused to provide the documentation to establish that its 2019 meter-sized rates meter-sized based rate scheme is fair and legal. This board approved in December 2020, spending a whopping, according to the IJ, $800,000 over 2 years to fight costs and one other ratepayer suit. So tonight, MMWD's counsel is asking you to approve racking up more billable hours in order to fight discovery, which is to say, fight transparency. If the current rates are fair, equitable, and proportional, the district has nothing to fear and should simply hand over the requested documents to prove that its approach is valid. Directors should not approve additional legal hours and spending ratepayer dollars to fight ratepayer demands for transparency and rate fairness. So I urge that MMWD directors tell outside counsel tonight not to challenge the judge's order and to simply turn over the requested documents in accordance with the principles of transparency and fiscal responsibility. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. There are no further public comments.
And I would also like to request that after the executive session that there be a report out of whatever was decided in it. Thank you.
There are no further comments. Would you like to convene and go to closed session?
Are we ready for that, President Russell? We might have had a disconnect. Perhaps Vice President can convene us to close session and we can meet on this other site.
Yes, well, I will convene us to close session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Okay. The closed session was adjourned at 6:37 and the staff was given direction. With that, we need public comment. No,
Yes.
not
Yes.
quite, right? Yes?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Um,
public comment, I guess. Okay.
Yes, sir. We have one public comment, 1402, please, and then Ed. So go ahead, 1402.
James Holmes, Larkspur. When I opened my water bill I was surprised and disappointed to find no return envelope. I thought maybe it was just a one-time oversight, but then when I opened the water bill for my late parents' home, it too lacked an envelope. Candidly, the words that this brings to mind are cheesy and chintzy. A very pleasant district customer service representative blamed the supply chain problem with the district's vendor. However, apparently the problem was unique to the water district because all my other bills included return envelopes. Pardon me. Customer service person who was very nice kindly sent me an envelope, but I'd already mailed my 2 payments. In any case, omitting the return envelopes is not only deviates from standard commercial practice, but given the high water rates, it could literally add insult to injury. So please don't do it again. Thank you.
Thank you. Ed, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I may have missed them, or hopefully it's already in the works, but I'd just like to suggest that the Jacob study be certain to include information on what level of reduced operation a desal plant can be operated at without being taken out of service, the cost per MGD of shutting down and restarting a diesel plant, and the annual cost per MGD for maintenance while desal capacity is offline. Knowing these costs is essential to having a handle on trading off alternatives like on-off Sonoma water, if it's available, versus desal. We presently seem to have way too much lack of clarity on these desal costs and operating characteristics, but I'm sure the info is out there somewhere and known to experts in the desal field. With only 40 to 45% of our water use potentially available from recycling, desal is our only answer for surviving a future with droughts. And we can't wait 8 to 10 years for a possible regional desal facility whose East Bay mud is not able to deliver to us. Thanks for your attention. It's always appreciated.
Thank you.
Good.
And our next speaker is Phil Sotter.
Good evening. When I opened my bill this week, I took a look at it, and I didn't think there was an envelope. I looked around for a while, but what really caught my attention and just made me really happy was right on the front page was my daily usage in gallons. And I swear I have not seen that before. I went over to pay my bill today and I asked the folks at the counter if this was a new format, and they said, yeah, we are doing a new format, but this is exactly the information I was hoping we could get, where users could open their bill and say, how much am I using? And thank you so much for including that information. Underneath that was a big white space. And my second hope, and I don't know how long it'll take us to get there, would be a number that says, what's my target usage? What would the district or what would Marin Water like to see if we get a good long-term conservation program going? What's my goal? What should I try to do? I do think that people in Marin are really good folks. And if we decide that we want to do a long-term steady state, day in and day out conservation program, and you give people a sense of what they're doing now and where we would like to see them so that we are, stable with the water supply that we have, I think we could make some real progress. So thank you for part A, and I'll keep coming back and looking for part B in the future someday.
Thanks, Phil.
There are no further speakers.
Okay. Directors and general managers announcements. Anybody? Okay, Ben, have at it.
Thanks, President Russell. I'd like to briefly reflect on some items on tonight's agenda, specifically items 7, 8, 9, 10. Item 7 is a water supply update that illustrates, as it has for the past 6 or so weeks, that we are not in the drought emergency we had been last year. You'll get the details. We're still above average for this time of year and 94-95% full. This item is followed by item 8, which is staff's recommendation to remove the drought restrictions on irrigation that the board imposed in the midst of the drought emergency we've recovered from. That is then followed by an item on non-functional turf and then an item on expanding our water recycling program. Both of these items, 9 and 10, reflect the district's commitment following the board's direction that even though we're out of this emergency, we're continuing all efforts to increase our water resiliency into the future, both the supply side and the demand side. As we know, this will not be the last drought that we'll have to face. Thank you. That's all I wanted to share.
Thanks.
I have just one thing, Larry. I think I said this before, but in the event I didn't, I hope I'm reminding everybody that April 8th is the North Bay Watershed Association Biennial Conference. We missed it last time because of the coronavirus, but that's a new date. We'll have a bunch of good speakers. The topic generally is climate change and weather. So April 8th.
Thank you, Jack. Okay, I need a motion to approve the consent calendar.
I'd move approval. There's just one niggling correction on the minutes on which indicate I voted no to approve our prior minutes, and I think I was late getting to the meeting, so it would just be an absent. Okay.
But we were early. Yes.
I'll second the motion.
Roll call.
Director Bregman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Kohler,
Aye.
Vice President Schmidt,
Aye.
and President Russell.
Delayed reaction there, Cynthia. Aye. Okay, item 7, water supply update.
Good evening, Paul Sellier, Operations Director. The short presentation this evening is, I'm sure you're all come to expect, on the edge of your seats as we go through our water supply update. So we'll hit the usual chapters. We'll take a look at where we are today, right now. We'll have a look at what the water supply projection looks like, and then we'll consider what NOAA and others are telling us about what we can expect in our forecast, and we'll wrap it up. So it's very brief this evening. Our rainfall 21-22 year, we can see in the gray over here, and we're well above average for where we are this time of year. Even our reservoir storage, you can see, I think Ben hit it, we're about 110% of average storage for this time of year, and better off than we were in 2019, 2020, a couple of years ago. So as we consider those facts, we're 95% full. You can see that the spill line drawn just below the 80,000 acre feet up there. As I continue to add lines to our favorite chart of projections, it gets maybe very, very clustered. What you can see here, just to go through it briefly, are the triangles representing the trigger levels that would cause us to pull out our drought contingency plan. And the black line showing the reservoir storage level where we've been over the last couple of years. And where it ends up here is where we are today. The variety of dashed lines, the green line is an average, what storage would look like with average rainfall from this point onward. And then the blue line is 50% of average and 25% of average being the orange line. And the gray line representing no additional rainfall whatsoever. And as you can see, that ends in this sort of star here at the end of the water year. October 1st of this year, 2020, will be right around average, and that's with no additional rain at all. And that average storage level is just represented by this blue line across the chart. So it's a good situation for us to be in. Of course, January and February have been remarkably dry to this point. In fact, I did a little digging, and indeed, I think it may be the dry, if it continues with no rain in February, it may be the driest January, February that we've had. At this point, you'd have to go back to 2013 to find one similarly dry. And prior to that, it was 1920. So we are entering some uncharted waters in terms of precipitation. And here we are, our 8 to 14 day outlook from NOAA. It does show us being below normal. When we look at our 10-day, favorite weather apps, there's no rain in the forecast for the next 10 days. As we look further out, NOAA is giving us a 3 to 4 week look. And what they're telling us with this equal chances is really, they don't know. It could be either way. So we'll just keep an eye on the weather, as it were, and hope for the best. And meanwhile, plan for the worst. So summary, in a good news sense, cumulative precipitation is above average, even though we've been dry for quite some time. So those storms in October and December really bailing us out at this point. And of course, the reservoir storage levels are looking pretty decent for this time of year. Precipitation is forecasted below normal. Our storage projections show that at the end of the water year, we'll be at about an average position for water supply. Our messaging, of course, to our customers, and we'll hear, more tonight in the subsequent items that Ben mentioned. But our overall message is that while we're out of the drought emergency, we do want to continue to use water wisely. That's the end of the presentation this evening.
Thank you, Paul. I think that's particularly important, though, that average, the October 1st number, is contingent, of course, in the long run on rain coming the next year. Now, if it stays like this, we're going to be right back where we started. Maybe a little better than we started in the last event. So we have to be very careful here to conserve.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Go ahead, Larry.
Yeah, I agree with your caution, and I think it might be better to describe it as we're out of our immediate drought emergency, because we're not out of drought statewide. And the other thing on storage, 10 to 20,000 acre feet is in Sulahuli, which is, a challenge to use. So, the storage capacity numbers, I think, need to be put in context a little bit, and our residents need to understand that. So I just think we need to be very cautious and maybe add that word immediate, that we're out of the immediate drought emergency, but we're not out of drought.
No.
Yeah, that's a good point. Of course, it's nice to have savings. So, that's how I look at Sulahuli. It's our backup supply. We all remember renting the generator and all that stuff. So I'm sure most of us saw the newspaper, and I think to the public in particular, that this is the driest period in 1,200 years for the extent of time. That's a pretty long time. And, when people criticize us for not being prepared for this, it's kind of, you have to keep that in mind, that this is not a usual event. This is something extraordinary. So, any other thoughts? Okay. Let's move on to the public hearing, adopting ordinance 4.5, public comment on the water supply.
There are no public comments on this item.
Public hearing, adopting ordinance 458, amending chapter 13.04 entitled Comprehensive Drought Water Conservation and Enforcement Measures to Title 13 of the Municipal Water District Code, repealing the prohibition on overhead spray irrigation.
Good evening, board. Carrie Pollard, Water Efficiency Manager. I have this item. We're going to start with the presentation, and then I'll hand it back over to the board for discussion. We're looking at the repeal of the irrigation drought restrictions. Okay, starting with an overview, we'll look at what was enacted over during the drought period pertaining to irrigation. We'll look at the additional drought restrictions that were put in place, our normal year waterways prohibitions, briefly discuss the statewide drought emergency declaration, and then close out with the recommendation and next steps. So the irrigation restrictions that were enacted during the drought, there were threefold. Starting at the top, most recently in October, the board adopted an irrigation prohibition, which prohibited any irrigation during the months from December through May. Prior to that, there was an irrigation limit to 1 day per week, which was enacted in July. And then back in May, there was an irrigation limit restricted to just 2 days per week. So when each of these ordinances were put in place, it repealed or replaced the prior ordinance. So currently, as of today, only the winter irrigation prohibition is currently in place. But I wanted to provide the history of the process of where we had been before. In addition to those irrigation prohibitions, there are other drought restrictions that have been enacted. These items are not up for consideration of repeal this evening. And so I wanted to just cover them for clarity. This includes pool filling, installation of landscapes and new connections, golf course irrigation is restricted, washing of vehicles is prohibited, all pools should be covered, adding water to decorative fountains or pools is not allowed, the use of potable water for dust control or really any other use that could be met with tertiary treated recycled water is required. And finally, a prohibition on power washing of buildings is also currently in place. Beyond these, yep.
Even though these are not part of the ordinance that we're bringing, we are interested in board discussion on subsequent board meetings in your thoughts on how to handle these restrictions as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ben. In addition to those drought restrictions, there's some normal year waterways prohibitions that had been carried over and incorporated into our drought response. And so these are, when we refer to normal year, it actually is defined in our code as our ongoing water conservation programs that are designed to maximize water supply during periods of relatively normal rainfall. So it actually, that normal year does have a definition when we refer to it in this context. So some of these items that were carried forward into our drought response was irrigation prohibitions on time of irrigation, irrigating public street medians, runoff, overspraying, gutter flooding is not allowed. Irrigation within 48 hours of rainfall is not allowed. The use of a garden hose without a shutoff nozzle, again, is prohibited. And finally, the ornamental landscapes and irrigation of turf for more than 3 days per week would be something that would be incorporated into our normal year or is a standard item within our normal year as well. Back one. All right. A few other items that were carried forward from our normal year into the drought prohibitions were towel and linen service in hotels, serving water upon request in restaurants, and finally requiring leak repair be completed in a timely manner from our customers. Taking a look at the statewide drought emergency declaration that was became effective on January 18th, the state has called for a 15% voluntary reduction in demand statewide. Here are the list of prohibitions that were included in that emergency declaration, many which align closely with our normal year prohibitions, including filling or topping off fountains, washing of sidewalks or hardscapes. The use of potable water for construction is not allowed. Runoff is not allowed. Use of a garden hose without a shutoff nozzle, irrigation within 48 hours, and finally, irrigation of public street medians with turf is prohibited. The recommendation before the board this evening is to adopt the proposed ordinance 458, repeal the prohibition on operating outdoor sprinklers during the winter months. And it includes reinstating the 3 days per week, which is included in our normal year rules on irrigation. Looking ahead at next steps. So as the board considers the repeal on irrigation prohibition, staff recognizes the incredible progress that was made to engage the community as part of our drought response. And we'll have a committee meeting tomorrow. The Water Efficiency and Communications Committee meeting tomorrow will go into detail on the incentive programs and new long-term efficiency programs that are being developed. But we want to recognize, we've increased water use awareness we've continued to engage the community. We want to continue to provide education and resources to really assist our customers in that path to be more efficient. The state emergency drought regulations I mentioned do apply to our service area, and it is a 15% voluntary action statewide. The water supply resiliency policy continues to move forward. And finally, as Ben mentioned, the board could consider repealing some of the remaining drought prohibitions, potentially drought emergency declaration, and we are looking for feedback on those items as well. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I will turn it back over to our President Russell.
Okay, thank you. Any comments, folks?
I just have a question on that. Was the 3-day limit, or where do we stand on that? I saw it in there, but I missed exactly where it fell. Is that one we are eliminating or we're keeping?
That would be one we would keep. We would actually be, or we're proposing to bring it back. It was part of, prior to the drought, it was part of our normal year waterways prohibitions, and the proposal is to bring it back.
And would we be abandoning the mandate of which days you can water? So
correct.
The ratepayer would be able to choose their own 3 days. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
So Carrie, thanks for this presentation. This seems like a very reasonable approach. I think hearkening back to Ben's comments at the beginning, these are restrictions that were put in place because we were in an immediate emergency. But I think you've heard from everybody here today that we are all aware that we're not in, we are still in a drought, and we should still have a drought mentality, but going back to a more normal approach. And as far as all the other restrictions, they all seem to be not about using less water, but wasting less water. I mean, that really seems to be where the staff is headed with this recommendation, right? That we want to we want to be in a situation where we're not wasting is what we are doing as a matter of course. If I'm understanding your recommendations specifically. So it's a very narrow repeal of something that was sort of, put into place to respond to the immediate and, a very, very severe situation. And we are now in to use Phil Sotter's term, we're in a long-term, conservation approach where really what we're talking about is not wasting water.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good clarification. And I think leaving the new hookup restrictions is well thought, especially if we're going to maybe move forward with non-functional turf. And I think that's really the direction we need to pursue, which is building that foundation for the future. How are we going to approach this long term? And, we should be starting with our new customers and our new hookups. So I think that was a good decision. So other than that, I share everybody else's comments about where we are and just,
right.
we're still in it.
Right. I characterize it as we're pulling away from mandating behavior and we're going to encouraging behavior. How people behave is obviously very important to us, but, and we'll encourage it as best we can with our policies.
Yeah.
I agree. If I could just weigh in, Ben, I think that we have been through something that has completely changed our paradigm about how we view our water supply, and we're never ever going back to this board, and I think the district as a whole is never going back to thinking the way we might have 3 years ago. Not that we weren't thinking about drought and conservation and climate change, but we've been through an unprecedented hydrology and we are continuing to go through it. And that is going to necessitate us doing a lot of things differently. And I think we've already begun that work very much so, especially with the water supply assessment and other things. I think the challenge that we have is that I agree with repealing the irrigation restrictions. I think that makes sense. Where I'm stuck is with the additional drought restrictions. We have to ask ourselves, are we going to, when we're 95% full, and we're above average storage, are we going to be prohibiting these actions on into the future? Or some of them going to stay in place until we increase our water supply storage or our water supply reliability and into the future? I think that we have a question in front of us that we are not answering with these additional things, which is, are we going to prohibit washing cars on into the future or under certain circumstances? And I know that I don't mean to make light of these things. I think that ultimately the public is looking for us to sort out which of these things should stay in place because they are good practices. They're about not wasting water on in the future because we are about not wasting water and we always will be going forward. Some things were put in place because we are in a water supply emergency that we are not in currently because of our storage level. Our water supply reliability is still an emergency. We do not have the reliability that we need going forward, and there's a difference. And I just think that we ultimately, when we look at, people who, are we prohibiting people from filling a pool? Until when? It's not the most burning concern for a lot of people, but functionally, these are just things that we need to deal with. And so I think that we need to give some quick thought to which of these additional restrictions should remain in place as our regular a matter of order, or if we have, or which ones need to be repealed because they are no longer relevant under our current water supply scenario. And to make that clear going forward so that folks can understand and plan accordingly.
If I
yes,
because I just want to be clear, because I agree with Monty. I just want to be clear. My comments before were not about these restrictions. They were about the slide where Carrie was had all of the normal. Like that's what I was talking about when I was referring to not wasting. So these are additional drought restrictions, and I agree that these are worthy of further conversation.
Perfect. That is, I was concerned there was a sense that staff was recommending only proceeding. We just brought this item because it had kind of a time sensitivity associated with it. But staff's general recommendation is that given we're out of the drought emergency and the conditions that we impose these restrictions no longer exist, that we should move these off, pull these back at a subsequent board meeting. In parallel, as we're going to begin at the Water Communications and the Conservation Communications Committee tomorrow, continue to talk about long-term drought initiatives, and likely some of these may funnel into that. But we do think the drought emergency and these items, we do think as a matter of practice and just where we are in terms of the basis for imposing them, that our recommendation would be at a subsequent meeting to remove these.
Can I ask a quick question? Because I think that's fine. The one question I have, and I'd like to hear what the board thinks. The one thing on this list that seems to me we may really want to consider keeping is requiring pool covers. I'm not sure why that is something we wouldn't just, that feels like a water waste issue, not as opposed to like filling pools. That feels like something people should get to do, of course. But I don't, so I'm just interested in what my fellow board members think about that one.
I think that makes complete common sense. That to me, that's the wasting of water that we no longer can afford to do. And I would also look at use of potable water for dust control. If we have recycled water available, let's use that on into the future. I mean, I'm open to hearing that it's an undue burden or something if I don't understand it correctly. But otherwise, that makes total sense. But things like decorative fountains, are we going to have them or not? If we are, then they need to be refilled at some point. And same thing with filling pools or washing vehicles.
Right. Perhaps Molly could weigh in terms of process that these might have been established under the emergency. And from just a process standpoint, we would talk about which of these do we want to migrate to our kind of ongoing program. I don't know, Molly,
Sure.
can you?
Sure. There's a bit of a different process for adding to our code in a non-emergency setting. So we adopted these drought response ordinances under the water code sections that I identified a way to do it with immediacy because it was urgent. So they came into effect upon adoption. Once the board made a decision, they were in effect. We can certainly look at incorporating some of these into our regular district code, and that would be a regular ordinance process. The only difference really is we don't have to have a public hearing for that, and we would have a 30-day effective date. So anything that we would bring to the board for enactment in our permanent code that's a non-drought emergency response would just be under a regular ordinance process. But it's something that we can definitely look at, and I think we've already been talking about. Is that what you were looking for, Ben?
We're talking here, and I think the key to this is to measure twice, cut once, and to move very cautiously here. I mean, there are many other ones that were mentioned. B is a good one. Landscape installation restrictions, especially tagged in with the next subject. You know, a lot of these can be addressed with a philosophical approach for how water waste should be avoided. Anything else?
I think the only thing I would add is that some of these, and Molly, I'd be interested in your thought on this. I mean, all water in California is subject to the doctrine of reasonable use. And, you know, a use that was reasonable 10 or 5 years ago may not be reasonable today. It's sort of, I think that might be useful to use your paradigm, Larry, of a philosophical approach as we think about this, right? What really is a reasonable use? Having water in your pool so you can do laps or wade or whatever, that may be a reasonable use, but simply allowing water in a pool to evaporate because you don't have a cover, probably an unreasonable use given the situation. So I'm seeing Molly nod, so I must be on the right track.
I think you're right. I think you're right, Director Kohler. There's been an evolution in our understanding that continues today, and I think it's worth evaluating exactly how you're.
But you know, like I hope that we can that staff will thank you for bringing this forward. This constantly continues to be a very fluid, I'll use the pun, situation where we're having to adapt to a new set of situations, and these restrictions we're now, each one of these I think needs to be looked at and thought about. Should this continue because it's the right way to not waste water, or can it be repealed as whole, or is there some place in between? And I look at the landscape installation restrictions for new connections, and I think that if the landscaping is not going to put in turf, then are we going to ban? When would a new connection be able to do landscaping? If not,
landscape plan.
Sure.
That's not wasteful.
Great. Then I think we should say that. I'm just saying that we ought to be clear about each of these. What is the path forward that's reasonable given our circumstances?
Well, it says restrictions, not prohibition. So I don't know.
Well, however we come out on each of these individually, it's important that we have a well thought out variance procedure to it. Pool covers, for example, on the face of it, yeah, I would agree 100%. Without a pool, without a cover, you're wasting water. But that might vary. Seasonal covers may be a factor to be considered here, or perhaps the difference between a home pool that gets somewhat little use versus recreational pools in community centers, which get a lot of use. I think different rules for different situations, and I think with each one of these on the list, same sort of considerations have to be made.
Yeah. Indoor versus outdoor pool.
Yeah.
There you go.
So if I could characterize what I've heard is at an upcoming board meeting, potentially our next board meeting, staff would bring an ordinance to pull back these items with a robust discussion of looking at every one of these and helping to frame where the board would like to go in context of new long-term permanent restrictions. Pool covers is an example, and there was discussion on that. So the one we didn't cover, because it's not on this list necessarily, is the drought emergency itself. And staff would recommend that as well would be pulled at the upcoming board meeting.
Well, I want to catch you on two things, Ben. One is that you phrase that as that we want to pull back every single one of those restrictions, and I'm not sure that that's necessarily the case. I think it's that we want to see recommendations on each one of them, because I think some we might want to keep. So right. I don't know if that's what you meant. I don't mean to.
I suggest we cut this for a bit and let's open the public hearing and hear what our friends have to say, and then we can pick this up at the end after we've heard what the public.
Can I, Larry, can I ask one question? Because the public hearing is not about this. The public hearing is limited to the ordinance, which is actually not about what we've been talking about just now. So could I ask either you, Larry, or Molly to like frame for the public? I mean, they can comment on whatever they want to comment about, but the public hearing is specifically about the ordinance that we're supposed to vote on. So could we just review what that is? Because that's not about this conversation we just had.
Yes, that's correct. So the question, the public hearing is about the adoption of proposed ordinance number 458, which specifically repeals the overhead spray irrigation restriction and supplants that with our normal year 3-day-a-week overhead spray allowance.
Right, and that's
what the public hearing is about.
And that's what some of us were referring to as the no waste rule, as opposed to the normal, the sort of normalizing the concept of no waste.
Right, correct.
Okay, thank you. Can we open the public hearing now? Okay.
All right, we have 6 public speakers. So the first 3, Phil Sotter, Paul Mann, and Andrew McCullough. Mr. Sotter, please.
Yes, I'd like to thank the board for the thoughtful way that you're approaching this and the kinds of questions you're asking. I really feel very uneducated to be able to comment on these. And the thing that would make it so much more useful is if we had a sense as to how many gallons are we talking about? How do we look at each of these restrictions? And how do we look at putting in a restriction? How do we look at taking off a restriction? What's the number of gallons? Or if you choose to use hundreds of cubic feet or whatever numbers you're comfortable with. I don't know if the board members know these numbers, if staff know these numbers, but as a member of the public, it would really be helpful to see what are we talking about in terms of priority. If I had to rank these 8, if I could only pick 7, or if I can only pick 3, which were the ones that would make the most difference? I can easily go onto the district's website and I can find out how many gallons a leak that's a drip a second uses, but I have no idea what it means when you power wash a building or when you wash a car or when you irrigate golf course greens. I really don't know. And I think as we try to become more informed as a board, as staff, and as members of the public, it would really help to try to put numbers against these efforts whenever possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mann? Go ahead, Mr. Mann.
You're muted.
I can't pick him up. How about Mr. Andrew McCullough, please? Oh, there's Mr. Mann. Mr. Mann? Mr. Paul Mann? Okay, let's go to Andrew McCullough.
This is Andrew McCullough. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I just want to say I very much appreciate the action that is being proposed this evening, which is to repeal some of the restrictions that no longer fit within the emergency declaration from last spring. And I appreciate all the work that went into this by staff. I would direct your attention, though, to one item on the list of additional drought restrictions that appears to be an outlier, and I'm hoping it was oversight that led to its inclusion in the list of restrictions that will remain in place. as I believe it should be one of the restrictions that would be repealed now because it fits within the definition of overspray irrigation. And that, of course, is the singling out of golf courses and specifically the irrigation of fairways, meaning the areas between tees and greens. So this restriction was put in place last May when we were all in full swing here and looking at ways in which we could very aggressively reduce water usage. And when the restriction went into place and a variance was issued for the golf courses, you will recall, certainly Carrie recalls, that the golf courses under the jurisdiction of MMWD collectively were achieved a 40% reduction in water consumption during the ensuing months, better than any other category of users, I believe, within the district. So fast forward now, if we're now in the mode of removing restrictions, that makes sense to do so given the water supply update we've just heard, I would ask that this board add or rather repeal, add to the list of those items being repealed, the restriction against watering fairways. And just as a reminder, it is the only business being singled out here to have restrictions remain in place against it. And I'm not sure that findings exist, given the present state of water supply, that would justify including golf courses as a business in the remaining restrictions, even if this is going to be addressed soon by the board. So that concludes my comments. I'm hopeful that the board will entertain my recommendation or my request that we remove this item from the additional list and that it be placed on the list of those items being repealed.
Thank you, Mr. McCullough. Let me remind us that we're only talking about the spray irrigation issue tonight. That's what the public hearing is about. It's fine to talk about other things, but what the action item is removing the restriction on spray irrigation.
The next speaker is Paul Duder, Roger Roberts, and I'm going to try to get Mr. Paul Mann again. Paul Duder.
Hi, yeah, I'm still wondering what our goal is for how many years of supply that we need. The reason that that's relevant is because when we talk about these drought restrictions, it's in the context of how much supply we have and how much we need. If we need 4 years of supply, as some directors have suggested, then when our reservoirs are full, we really only have half of what we need. We're kind of at 50%. What I'm trying to say is that, I've heard people say we're at 95% of our reservoirs. That's true, but that's a little bit, that gives people the wrong impression. That gives them the impression that we don't have a supply issue. If we have a supply issue, then some of these drought restrictions should probably not be lifted. So I guess the question is, Director Schmidt wrote an op-ed about suggesting we needed 3 years of supply. There was an agenda item on the agenda a couple of meetings back that was removed. Are we going to have that back on so that the directors can talk about how many years of supply we need?
The answer is yes, and it will be addressed in the water plan that's going on now. So just be patient. We got a few more months to start seeing the output from that plan.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Duder. Mr. Roger Roberts.
Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, Roger.
There's still the state restrictions of water use to which MMWD must comply. The leading one is a 15% reduction in water use. So as you proceed with removing the restrictions, it needs to be done in the context of what the state requires and the targets that the state requires of a 15% reduction of use. And I assume that staff will be proceeding on that basis, yes?
Yes, we will definitely be complying with the state regulations. Carrie can correct me. My understanding is they fall under our normal water year restriction. So, which really illustrate that this district is well ahead of most of the state in our standard kind of water efficiency practices.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Mr. Mann, can you speak, sir?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, hallelujah. Thank you. Well, first, I want to commend the staff and the board for acknowledging the situation we're in. Chairman Russell just pointed out California's entered its worst mega drought in 1,200 years. And this is actually the longest midwinter dry spell we've ever had. That said, I think right now is a time that we all need to be thinking beyond the conversation of restrictions and talking more about investing in ways to decrease water usage and increase water supply. At my company, Water Champions, we're installing solutions that are innovative and affordable, that are recycling gray water. They're capturing rainwater. If there is no rain, those tanks hold delivered water. They reduce potable water usage by 50% or more. And these systems work. And I really want to invite the Marin Water staff and board members to come see them for yourself in action. By the way, I'm not making this up. Australia, they've already adopted these solutions to battle drought, and they're investing far more than we are in creating rebates and incentives that make these systems more widespread and affordable. So come learn more about them. You can learn more, contact us at thewaterchampions.com, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next two speakers, James Krajewski and Jan Lotion. Go ahead, Mr. Krajewski.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to comment on that list of restrictions, because there was one restriction on there that said that there was a restriction on topping off pools. It was my understanding that that restriction never passed of topping off pools because of the concern about the health effects of having empty pools around. So I would think the staff needs to relook that to see if that actually was a resolution that passed on topping off pools. I am in favor of releasing restrictions, but I'm also in favor of the district putting out some statement about what the vision, the end point or the vision of conservation is. And I think that that's what's been missing, and there's some discussion of that in this, but ultimately we need a vision of where we're headed in the next year, the next 5 years or something with all of these restrictions. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd just ask before we move on, because he asked a fact question. Carrie, can you respond to that? I just want to make sure the public record is clear on the situation.
Of course. So the bullet point referred to refilling or topping off decorative pools and fountains. So it's the decorative pools. It's not for swimming pools for recreation. So two different types of pools.
Thank you. And then Jan Lotion, please.
I want to thank the board for the very clear presentation of all the information that you have brought forward. I want to say that I am not in favor of easing the restrictions on overhead watering. The issue of what is reasonable use of water has been brought up this evening. Well, I don't think watering your yard 3 times a week during the winter when it is supposed to be raining is reasonable. If it were raining, you wouldn't need to water it 3 times a week. And if it's not raining, you shouldn't be watering it 3 times a week, because we're running out of water because it's not raining in winter. This makes no sense to me. There are 2 things. One is we do not know how long this drought is going to last without any rain, that this board is too short-sighted. You're going on 1 to 2 years. I agree with the previous person of bringing up the whole issue that 2 years worth of water is not enough. So we don't have that much to begin with. And then secondly, you don't know how long it's going to take to bring in more water from the outside. You don't know what's going to happen in terms of being able to raise the level of the dams. You may get, that may not be possible because of environmental restrictions. If the whole state of California doesn't have enough water, maybe we won't be able to get water from the Central Valley. Desalination may not work because there are environmental problems there too with changing the ecosystem of the bay. So you can't bank on any of the things that you think are going to bring in more water. I think we need to conserve more. And I think that all this talk about easing restrictions, how is that not going to stop people who have, I'm still not flushing my toilet all the time. I'm still taking water when I take a bath out to my deck to water it. Why should I be doing that when other people are watering big yards 3 times a week in the middle of winter? I have no motivation. And there are going to be other people thinking the same thing. The people who have buckets in their showers, why should they be doing that when you have people with large, very large yards watering 3 times in the middle of a drought winter? That makes no sense. More emphasis on conservation, more emphasis on the long term instead of thinking, oh goody, we have enough water until October of, a year and a half from now. That may not be enough, folks. It may not be enough. More conservation. Do not ease this. 3 times a week is not reasonable use of water in the middle of a drought winter. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Lucian. I have no further speakers.
I will only say one thing to Ms. Lotion's comments. We should all be trying to use the least amount of water that we can. Wasting none and using the least. It's a simple thing. Call it pride, call it civic responsibility, call it what you wish. But that should be the goal that we're talking about here. So with that.
I'm sorry, Director Russell, Ms. Jennifer O'Mara raised her hand just now.
Okay.
Okay. Go ahead, Ms. O'Mara.
Hi, thank you for taking my late comment. I was just listening to all the different comments, and one thing that kind of is inconsistent with the board's comments or Ben's comments, so he's not on the board, is that this is supposed to be the most efficient practice that we're going towards, that we're doing it. Spray watering is the most inefficient practice one can do. Drip is efficient, especially when you have mulch on it, a lot of other things. And so to go from 0 to 3, it's like going 0 to 60 in the middle of winter. And lifting that restriction without having maybe a modified restriction so people don't have to have their lawns completely die, it's like once a week or something else ready to go in place of that restriction would be more reasonable, and it would kind of be more moderate and allow people to save things that are about ready to die, as opposed to having a lush green grass in the middle of winter, and unnecessarily so, because grass goes dormant really when it's not watered, when it's cold. So you don't need to water your grass 3 times a week.
Thank you, Ms. O'Mara.
Yes, staff to respond to that. I mean, it's a staff recommendation, so. I
Yeah,
think
sure, I can address that. So the 3-day a week is up to 3 days, right? During the winter, and that's our normal year irrigation rule year round, right? So recognizing that our customers should be watering based on the weather and plant type, weather, and type of irrigation system, right? And so finding the most efficient way to irrigate their landscape, recognizing that it's up to 3 days a week throughout the year.
Well,
oh, hold on. I don't see her anymore. Oh, there she is. I apologize. Okay, go ahead, Ms. O'Mara.
Sure. Just respectfully, it's going from 0 to 3. It really doesn't accomplish. It doesn't send the message that use this more sufficiently, and it doesn't accomplish what you're talking about. It doesn't move somebody to use the water in the most efficient way. It doesn't. So, it'd be great to have something else in place, and and I'm not spray watering or anything, and I don't need to, but it'd be great to have the option if I needed it. But there's no way I can see anybody needing to do it 3 times a week without having a lush garden in February.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And then we have one more, Mara Perez, please. Mara. Go ahead, Ms. Perez.
Thank you. Briefly, it seems to me from what I hear that the board circulates in its practices from the past to the present, from the past to the present, when we know the situation we are confronting is very different from the situations we may have experienced 5, 10, 20 years ago. In fact, as somebody else said earlier, this situation happened last 1200 years ago. So every time I listen to the board, I think, at which point, and the staff, at which point will you all reshape the structure of your thinking, practices, policies, and recommendations so that they are fully aligned with the drastic situation we're facing now and we will in the future. Educate the public. There's plenty of literature about what's going on. Instead of thinking about whether we should put the cover on the pool or take the cover off the pool, where there are issues that are so much larger and pressing. I think you need to redesign your entire practice so that it meets the urgencies of the present. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Okay, with that, I will close the public hearing. And any further discussion from the board?
Could I just
course.
make a comment?
Of course.
And this may sound a little avoidance. Maybe we should put it over for a couple of weeks and see how February goes. I mean, to reduce restrictions in the middle of a low rain season does seem a bit contradictory, even though our immediate supply is better than it was. So maybe it would be better to put it over to our first meeting in March and just see whether we're going to get some relief that would further justify it. The other thing, and I know, Carrie, you've addressed this before, is to incrementally reduce the restriction to 2 days a week. But I mean, there's all kinds of unintended consequences with that, which I think the board is familiar with, people overwatering, et cetera, et cetera. So, those are my two suggestions on maybe an alternative way to skin the cat. But, I don't know if the other board members have any comments about those approaches.
It's an interesting comment, Larry. I mean, based on what Paul has said and what I've seen in the weather side, I mean, it's going to be dry through the end of February, it appears. I think Ms. O'Mara's comments were quite interesting and insightful. I think that reducing the number of days to 2 or 1.5 would be a good thing to do. We can always put it back on.
Right.
If we need it. It's not a cast in concrete.
Yeah, and it does send a more consistent message about how precarious the situation is right now.
Or perhaps even 1 day a week, based on the UC Davis guy. Remember we had that forestry guy in, or plants or something, and he was saying that 1 day a week is enough to keep the plants going. And as she said, and she's right, the grass does just go dormant. I have watched it in my own yard, and we haven't watered for 8 months or something like that. The grass got very brown. It looks pretty good now. It's not great, but it looks pretty good. So it is behaving exactly as they described. It goes into dormancy when it's cold and it doesn't have water, and it comes back when it does.
Yeah.
So, any other thoughts?
And I also noticed that up at the Meadow Club, which was completely brown about a month ago and was very, very green. recently from the recent rains, very verdant. So maybe it would be more prudent to take a more incremental approach.
I think that we have there's a right intention here, which is to be smart and be cautious, and I think we no doubt need to be that. I just think that what we're doing here is we're not thinking, we're taking measures that we're not fully investigating, because yes, while it comes to we can look at lawns as being, you know, the poster child, so to speak, of our biggest, you know, users of water that we're addressing. But what about people who are putting in landscaping that's drought tolerant? That is exactly the kind of landscaping we want in. But at this point in the year, if you're going to plant drought tolerant landscaping, you should be putting it in now, so that it has a chance to get established before the summer. And so if we do these kinds of things, I don't think we're thinking through the unintended consequences about the people who are trying to do the right thing. And I want to caution us we need to be thoughtful, but we also have 95% full reservoirs right now. And I think that we're sending very mixed messages by recognizing our storage is what it is. And that under those circumstances in other years, we would not have these measures in place. Now, maybe we should going forward into the future, because we recognize we are in the new future. And Ms. Mara is very right. We are not going back to any past paradigm, but we also need to be thinking, I want us to not be reactionary, but I want us to come up with something that makes sense today, tomorrow, and 5 years from now, recognizing the situation we're in. And under our current set of circumstances, with the full reservoirs that we have, it becomes very nebulous for us to pick 1 day a week or 2 days a week. I think if we're going to do anything that changes how we do things, we should be thoughtful about how we'll do it on into the future, so we'll always make sense and that people can plan accordingly.
Right. I 100% agree with that. And with a point Monty made earlier, that this analysis and these decisions need to be made in conjunction with what we're doing to plan for more water. It's a package. We need to look at it all together.
Can I just ask, I'm not sure, Monty, what you're recommending, because I think you've done a good job just now of laying out, the challenges between the near term, the long term. I think we're all there, but I'm not sure what you're recommending as far as this particular action, which is very, very narrow.
I think that our water use restrictions that are proposed in the current proposal should be adopted, because the
elimination
yes.
is, you're saying, should be adopted. Okay.
Yes. But I'm saying that we do that because they were done under emergency drought circumstances that don't exist anymore. We have a water supply resilience emergency, which is a separate point, Ben, that one of the other things that we were talking about and we held off is, do we rescind our emergency? And I think that is something as I've said before, we ought to make a very clear board resolution that we still have a water resilience emergency, but we are not currently with our water supply. We are not under a drought emergency because of our water supply. So I just want, I want us to be clearer so that when we explain to the public why we have restrictions, they're tied to our storage, and it makes sense. And then when our storage ever drops back down to certain levels, we act because it's based on our storage. Yep. And then that way it's clear and not ambiguous.
If I understood Carrie correctly, that is what happens. This is our normal. We're going back to our normal.
So go back to our normal wise watering use restrictions.
That's what we're doing. We're returning to what we had before the drought emergency.
Yes.
So, that seems pretty reasonable to me. I could very easily live with 2 days a week, though. The reality is we have no control here. We're not saying don't use more than X gallons of water to irrigate. We're not saying how long they should irrigate. So it's kind of a nebulous thing, 2 days a week, 3 days a week. Is it for 2 days a week for 5 minutes a time? We haven't said. At least I don't think we've said that. So, people are smart. They're going to do what they need to do and try to live with our suggestions or requirements, depending what you call them. But, you know, I don't think we're going to use the AMI data to track people to see, oh, look, you know, somebody's irrigating 4 times a week. I don't see that in our current thinking. So I think the suggestion of a reduced number is a good one. I agree with the nebulousness of our future. And then, you know, we and all the other folks are in the same boat. Nobody really knows what's going to happen. And then you throw climate change on top of all that, and you twist all the past. It destroys the past record for usefulness. So I would think it would be appropriate to be more conservative, but I'm also, like Monty, ready to go with this because we need to take action here. I'm getting pressure from my neighbors and others that they need to address it's so dry that, you know, things are drying out. So they need water.
I'm just gonna make a motion to amend the ordinance to 2 days a week. See if there's a second out there.
I
don't hear anything.
I'll
Okay.
second it.
Okay. So there's a motion on the table to amend to 2 days a week.
I just have a comment if I could make one.
Of course.
I think it would be useful to sort of step back and see exactly what we're doing here, because I think what's gotten conflated, and I think this is reflected in some of the comments, is what's before us, what staff has put before us, and I'm fine with Larry's motion. I'll support that. But what we've been asked by staff to do today is something very, very narrow, right? I mean, and all of the comments about how we shouldn't pretend that everything's normal because the reservoirs are full and, you know, climate change, all of that is correct. It is also correct that in this near term, right, we are in a different position than we were at the beginning of the drought emergency. And I believe what staff is doing is simply trying to acknowledge that in the normal course of things. And they are asking us to take what I think is a relatively small action. And I want to go back to something Phil, or I think it was Phil, and others have said, we don't really know how much water is involved here, right? So there is work we have to do to quantify what all of our different water actions, you know, all of our different water strategies, what they all represent, you know, either in acre feet or gallons per day or whatever it is. And at least as I understand the staff recommendation, is a very narrow question of acknowledging that we are no longer in the kind of emergency that our own regulations recognize as an emergency, and to move us and to simply acknowledge that for our customers. I think that's completely separate from all of the other comments, and I'm hearing considerable board consensus about how do we address the new normal, right? And Ms. O'Mara's comments about, you know, I'm not a landscape, professional. So if 3 days a week is too much, I think that's something for us to ask our staff to look at. Just because that was the normal, I understand that's the reason, that's the recommendation, that has been the normal in the past. But I think it's a very reasonable thing to say, should we be moving away from spray irrigation? And that's not something we're going to snap our fingers and be able to get the community to do overnight. So if we want to move in that direction, what does that entail? How much water are we talking about? What does it look like? What's the time frame? What are the incentives to move us? So I guess what I'm saying to everybody who came with these very heartfelt comments, you know, very confused about why we're going back to what seems to some at least to be water waste, is that we are simply trying, management staff is recommending that we comply with our own processes as an institution. It doesn't mean that it ends there. We are going forward, and I invite you all to come to tomorrow's conservation meeting with, in this new paradigm. And I think part of the new paradigm needs to be, should this be normal? Should watering 3 days a week overhead with oversized sprays, should that be our normal? And if it shouldn't be, let's make a policy and let's try to implement it with appropriate incentives and, and encourage, different technology, different behaviors, whatever it is. But that's not what we're doing tonight. We're not making any kind of long-term policy, policy determination. So I would say simply.
Kind of are. I mean, we're going back to the ordinance that was in place before.
No, I'm saying that is not a long-term decision. We're making that decision.
Change.
We're being asked to make that decision because we cannot justify the emergency restrictions under our own policies. Am I getting that? I see Molly's nodding. So Molly's nodding. I think I'm on the right track. Okay. So I'm just trying to explain, because I do think the public is very, very confused about what we're doing. It's very dry. It's historically dry. Oh, but we're going to let people go back to, spray irrigate. I mean, so what I'm trying to say is there are different mandates that we are trying to address here. And this is a narrow one, and it is not the end. This is not a long-term decision that we are making. We are going to meet tomorrow to talk about the conservation plan. And that is a place where we can talk about, maybe we need to, and I think we do, change what has been normal. Just because it's been normal doesn't mean it has to be normal. And we have that, we can make that policy determination. We're just not making it tonight.
I also think we need to hear more from Mr. Mann. I thought his comments were very interesting. And hear more about the Australian actions and what they've done, what kind of incentives they put in place. I followed the Australians very closely on the up to the RO, and then I kind of lost interest in what they were doing.
The Australians everything with mandates, so I'm not sure we're quite there yet.
Well, I didn't mean mandate. I'm talking about the concept.
Right.
But
in addition,
let me finish. With that said, I think that the idea of the 2 days as a goal is a good one. I don't think we're going to turn into a enforcement agency overnight to say, oh, you got 2.5 days, you are irrigated too much. But it sets at least a pace for us, or a place for us to go to slow things down a little bit. So anyway, Monty?
I would just say, if we're going to listen to the Australians, let's maybe listen to our landscape and nursery businesses locally first, because honestly, they want to be partners in what we're doing here, and we're I feel like we're making a decision that has landscaping implications, which has, and I'm not picturing the lawns, I'm picturing the drought tolerant landscaping we want to see go in. And we're making decisions about irrigation that could affect whether people can do these things or not. I would rather make that decision in the process that Cynthia just talked about, where we actually do it consciously and we make it permanent, rather than because we feel like, let's not go all the way back, let's go part way back. There's not a basis for that. I feel like other than just a felt sense that we're being cautious. I would just rather us make informed decisions and bring in the people that need to help us make the right one. And then we don't have to change it at a later point.
But see, you're mixing up supply and demand here. The Australians is the supply side. The irrigation people are demand people. They want the water. The Australians are figuring out a way to provide the water. It's a very, very different scenario. And I think we have to be very careful here that we have a problem. Plants have a problem now because it's been so dry. And I think we need to address that problem. And I still believe that a 2-day-a-week goal is a good one. I don't see a problem with it myself. I hear what you're saying, but what you're really saying is you'd like to see all the cards that are in the deck. Well, that is never going to happen in water supply. That's the problem. You're always dealing with unknowns. You either don't know how much it's going to rain, or you don't know how much you're going to use or how much you're going to need. So you have to rub your tummy, literally, and come up with a plan that works. That's what you do in water supply. You can pretend it's science, but it's not.
I disagree, Molly. I'm sorry, Larry. I just disagree with a lot of assertions there about rubbing tummies and guessing work. I think that we actually can be more strategic. I know we don't know what the future looks like. We all know that, and all of us here, and I think every single person who's tuned in. So we know that, but we also had a water supply report that basically said if we had no rain for the rest of the year, we would come up about average. So we actually have some data that can tell us about how we can bracket our uncertainty. And so I'm just merely saying, like, let us, now that we have some breathing room to have some long-standing decision making, let's do it in a way that actually takes into consideration information about landscaping and other things, so that we can make some decisions that we can live with and make sense on into the future.
My point,
one alternative based on what I've heard could be, because President Russell, you did note 2 days as a goal. We could proceed with the action that we have as a recommendation, but add to that that as a goal, we're asking our customers to limit to 2 days a week, but it's not a restriction, and communicate that given the nature of the ongoing dry weather. But proceed with going back to our traditional restriction of 3 days a week, just as kind of a middle ground here for consideration.
So if I can make a couple of points to add on to that, what
course, Madam.
Ben just said. One is that I wanted to provide the framework in which all of these restrictions were adopted was pursuant to the water shortage emergency. And I'm not, the board certainly has the latitude to take steps more slowly to step backwards from that. But it is all done under the water shortage emergency, and that's the context in which the ordinances and all of these restrictions were put in place. So I think that's important to keep present in the discussion, present of mind. And at some point, the board will have to look at things and make a decision. Are we still in a water shortage emergency, or has the water supply been sufficiently replenished? So that's sort of the overarching issue. And in furtherance of Ben's discussion, I will point out that actually we have language in our normal year provision that's in the ordinance in front of the board, the 3-day irrigation, that says that customers are strongly encouraged to irrigate ornamental landscapes or turf on fewer days and only as required to maintain plant health. I just want to say that because it's laudable. It's laudable that this district already very much thinks about these issues and did before the drought and the water shortage emergency. So, and that said, we can pencil out 3 and put 2. That's a very easy change. So I'm going to put it back on the board to kind of make the decisions with that context.
Well, I think that's the motion. We have a motion and a second. So I think that's
Right.
where we're at.
Do we want to amend the motion to say we accept the staff's recommendation with the change from the 3 to 2 on the days of irrigation? So
I'll throw that back to Director Bregman.
I think we should just have a vote on the motion to amend for 2 days a week. I mean, we know that's our largest pool of discretionary water use.
Right.
So why not address it? We can revisit it if we get 8 more inches of rain where we get up to so-called normal 52 inches. We can address it. Until then, let's ease it. That's the message we should be sending.
well, I'm suggesting we keep that intact, but add in the same motion, accept the rest of the recommendation so that we capture the whole thing in one motion as opposed to a series of motions.
I agree. Yeah.
Larry, aren't you just
drafting and clarity? Yeah.
We're not suggesting changing anything else in the proposed ordinance other than the one word from 3 to 2, right?
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, that's an easy change. We don't need to have
Yes.
And the other thing to keep in mind is, nothing's cast in concrete, huh?
No.
So.
Well, that's what I was trying to say. We're not making the long-term decision today.
No.
We're just recognizing that the formal drought emergency as established under our own rules is not what we're dealing with right now. We're dealing with anyway, yeah.
Okay. So I guess the easiest thing to do is to call for the vote and see what happens.
Okay.
Director Bregman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Yes.
Director Kohler,
Aye.
Vice President Schmidt.
I'll say aye in order because we're moving forward with most things, but I disagree with the 2-day change.
So yes, okay.
Yes.
And then Director Russell, President Russell. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you all. Let's move on to number 9.
Carrie Pollard, Water Efficiency Manager. I have this item. It's a discussion on a prohibition on commercial non-functional turf. The board has heard a discussion, prior items on commercial non-functional turf and potentially developing a prohibition. we have received some feedback, and so tonight we have an informational item to cover some of the revisions that have been developed based on all of your input. Staff still proposing a two-pronged approach, starting with new connections. An ordinance could be developed where a prohibition for installation of non-functional turf in any new commercial connection could be implemented. We would roll this out and include it in part of our landscape plan review process. It would be fairly turnkey if that was a direction that the board was interested in going in. The second prong of this approach would be addressing existing commercial non-functional turf. Staff is proposing that an ordinance prohibiting the use of potable water for commercial non-functional turf be adopted and developed for the board's consideration. By focusing in on potable water use, prohibiting potable water use within these sites, there really is three pathways to compliance. One would be the site could just stop irrigating, right? They're no longer using our water for that use. Another would be for them to find an alternative water source potentially. And the third pathway of compliance would be to convert that non-functional turf to low water use landscaping. Staff would track participation in those three various pathways to determine compliance over a 3-year timeframe. We would target market the prohibition and incentive offerings to all of our customers who would have these commercial non-functional sites. And then after a couple of years, we continue to provide board updates, and we would then report back to the board on the progress of compliance to determine whether or not there would be a need for enforcement. And so really the idea here is that the board would then have the information to make an informed decision on whether or not enforcement was necessary to move forward on. The staff report does outline a tiered incentive approach with a declining incentive as we progress through the 3-year transition period. So this evening, staff is looking for direction to determine if either or both of those ordinances are of interest and should be developed and brought before you for your consideration at a future board meeting. I'd be happy to take any questions.
I have a question, Carrie.
Ask a quick question.
On the first page.
When you say, Larry, if I could just ask a quick question.
Of course.
When you say find alternative water, because isn't not, and again, I think it's really important to emphasize for the public that this is non-functional commercial turf. So we're not talking about residences at all, right?
Correct. Okay. This is commercial only.
Commercial only, right? So we're not talking about schools, we're not talking about parks.
Correct.
Okay. So is finding alternative water, are you considering gray water and recycled water there? Because isn't that, I just want to make sure we're clear with everybody about what you're talking about there.
Yeah, I think this the board comment was, that if a site had the ability or the desire to find another water source so that they could maintain that turf area that we had deemed non-functional, that could be an option that they could pursue.
Okay, so if they wanted to put in, for example, an extensive gray water system, that would count. Or if they wanted to do some sort of on-site, more extensive recycling, they could do that.
Like, or like San Francisco.
Right, or they wanted to capture rainwater coming off the roof with, cisterns.
Yeah, it's just moving away from using our potable water for areas that are deemed non-functional turf areas in the commercial setting.
Okay.
So my question, it says turf cannot be less than 30 feet in any dimensions. Does that mean should not be more than?
Yeah, the idea is that we would want to focus in on the very small areas that are not utilized. So it would be no less than 30 feet in any direction, right?
What does that mean though?
Think of a median strip that is adjacent to right next to a roadway that's 10 feet wide and not providing any community benefit.
Oh, I still don't understand.
So it means that large parks would not be included. They would automatically be taken out, right? So any large areas.
Right. So you're trying to limit it to this 30-foot strip.
Yeah, we're trying to limit it to areas that are blatantly just too small to be useful within the community.
Okay. I find the wording confusing, but okay.
My apologies.
So I would encourage staff to move forward with developing the ordinance that you've discussed. I'm not sure about the distinction between the two ordinances. Maybe you could clarify that, but I think the concept is a good one. And I think it's another long-term kind of goal that we should be moving towards. So.
Yep. Let me just provide some clarification. So one is existing turf, non-functional turf, and the other is new development, new connections. So prohibiting new non-functional turf, when that would be the distinction.
And I would say we want to start with new connections and see how that works. And in my opinion, it's just it's a more gradual approach, and just see how our climate and our architecture works with that kind of planning. It's a little more cautious.
Yeah, I think it's a good goal, but I don't like the mandatory aspect of it. I don't see a need for the mandatory aspect. I think it should be something that we recommend, we put an incentive in place. I think we should also look hard at our reclaimed water program to make sure we do our best of supplying as much water as possible to folks. And putting the burden back onto us as well as onto them.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
A little differently. I mean, I think let's just talking about the new connections. I mean, I don't see any, I don't see any reason to prohibit it in new connections. I mean, we're talking about small areas that, but as Carrie's described it, aren't providing benefits. So there's no cost. Like, why not prohibit it in new connections? I'm happy to provide, whatever incentives that we need, but I mean, what's the downside to doing that with new connections?
Plus, new connections have to do a landscape plan anyway.
Yeah.
So, why not just kind of evolve our landscape planning to that next step that we all know we need to get to, which is, reducing discretionary water use, which really don't have a lot of public benefits. So, as I look at it, if you apply it to new connections and see how it goes, it really will not have a detrimental effect on existing landscapes and existing customers particularly.
I think the issue still comes back to the mandatory versus.
But it would only be for new connections that, are not, they have to submit to a landscape plan anyway.
Right, but I don't think that's what this says.
Yeah, we're not landscape planners. Yeah, I mean.
No, we're water providers. And it's, why?
No, not at all. Yeah.
We're not water providers?
No.
We are a water provider.
Landscape planners? No.
No, I said we are a water provider.
Yes, correct. But Larry is talking about they have to take their landscape plans through the process. We're not part of the process.
No, that's true, but in Fairfax, at least, it goes through the municipal planning department, but then it's stamped at approved. I believe there's department review of municipal plans. So I'm just saying this can be folded into our existing process pretty easily.
It could be, except my point is they're set up for that. They have the authority to make those decisions, Fairfax planners in your case, whereas we do not. It's just a grab it's an overreach in my opinion.
May I provide some additional information? So the district does have landscape plan review requirements for current new connections. So every new connection goes through landscape plan review by district staff to ensure compliance with a number of restrictions that we have in place, including the state's model water efficient landscape ordinance. So we do already do landscape plan review actively.
Yeah, I think that's great for new connections, but the back page is talking about existing.
Can I make a suggestion?
I don't think we should go there yet. That's my point.
I agree.
Can I request that we do one at a time, because I think staff is looking for direction. So are we aligned on new connections that we're okay with the staff, with directing staff in this way?
I am.
I don't have a problem with new connections. I have a problem with existing.
Okay, great. So we've got
Right.
one. So Carrie, we've got one of the two. So I'm going to suggest that we now turn to the issue of existing connections.
I suggest we don't. Just go with new.
Okay?
Problem solved. Let's see how it goes.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
What are we waiting to see? I mean, anybody who has a new connection will do a landscape plan and there will be no non-functional turf. Like, what are we waiting?
Well, I think
I'm just saying, you're saying waiting to see how it goes. I'm
Well,
just
you-
not sure. I'm not sure what,
before you impose it on existing landscapes.
Right.
but what are you waiting to see? Whether people
How it works.
notice it's gone?
How it works, whether the climate will support it, whether the architecture is consistent with it. Is it too expensive? Let's see how it works in the real world on new connections.
I'm good with that. What about Larry? My question for Larry Russell. What about for existing connections, putting in place an incentive program, saying, this is the direction we'd like to go. Again, we're only talking about such a narrow band here. It's commercial and it's non-functional.
It's ornamental. You just look at it, it's green icing. I mean, aren't we in the new norm? Aren't we like, this is,
I could just point, it would be great. So what about directing staff to go forward with incentives for those existing non-functional commercial turf areas?
Absolutely.
Great idea.
I'm cool with that. In fact, we should
Yeah.
look at the numbers because I think the numbers are low.
They may be, but it's still important because at least I could be wrong about this, but Carrie, my sense is that part of what you're talking about with this non-functional commercial turf is that it's visible, right? So isn't part of the benefit here moving the community to a new normal?
So on that procedure, we would not be mandating that the existing have to be removed. We would just give them incentives to do that.
Right.
And they would have the choice within there. Yeah, I could, that's fine with me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have we given staff the direction you need?
Yes.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Okay. Public comment?
Yes, I see Roger Roberts. Mr. Roberts? Go ahead, sir.
Well, we talk about commercial uses, and I assume this is not only shopping centers, but also office parks. And so I think it's the office parks where you're going to find more of this issue with turf. And what do you do about situations where the turf is intermixed with other or ornamental plantings, which is typical in shopping centers? And in addition, and nothing to do with the discussion tonight, Larry Russell, your sound is muddy and I can hardly understand what you're saying. So I don't know what the problem is, but you may need to check your speaker system. Thank you.
I second that.
Okay, I will make a change. I am trying something new tonight and I will fix that.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Okay, then we need to move on to item 10.
Good evening, directors. This is an approval item and it's for design services on Peacock Gap recycled water expansion. I'll hand it over to Alex to start it off.
Hi, good evening, directors. I'm Alex Naya, engineering manager of the design section. So as Crystal just mentioned, this is an item for the expansion of the recycled water system for Peacock Gap. This afternoon, Zach Tabbitt is the engineer who will be presenting that item. So I'll hand it over to Zach right now.
Hi, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Zach Talbot, as Alex mentioned, associate engineer, and I'm here to present the Peacock Gap recycled water transmission pipeline project. Staff advertised a request for proposal in Q3 of 2021 to hire a qualified consultant to evaluate 3 different recycled water pipeline expansion alternatives, all of which go to the Peacock Gap area of San Rafael. The request for proposal was sent to 6 consultant firms and received 3 competitive responses. The 3 proposals were evaluated by a review committee according to the criteria outlined in the RFP. The review committee unanimously recommends that the district select West Yost based on their expertise in pipeline alternative analysis, their project understanding, strong technical skills, their experienced project manager, and sub-consultants. The project will authorize West Yost for tasks 1 through 3 with a final deliverable of a preliminary design report along with 30% drawings. The district will reserve the option to execute task 4, environmental documentation, with the consultant, which will require staff to return to the board at a future for approval. District staff requests that the board authorize the general manager to execute a professional service agreement with West Yost in support of the future Peacock Gap recycled water transmission pipeline project in the amount of $355,617 plus a contingency of $35,000 for a total authorized amount not to exceed of $390,617. Thank you.
Move approval.
Public comment.
Yes, Andrew McCullough. Good, Mr. McCullough.
Yes, thank you. I simply wanted to weigh in and say that on behalf of the Peacock Gap Golf Club, I very much support what's being proposed here this evening. As some of you know, this item was under consideration by the district in 2014, and it was our sincere wish at the time that the district had moved forward. It chose not to, but this is now the opportunity to rectify that. And with the addition of recycled water to the Peacock Gap neighborhood, there is, of course, the potential that there could be a further extension of the transmission line to some, many, or all of the 5,000 homes that exist on the Point San Pedro Peninsula.
Right.
So that, I would say I very much support what's under consideration here.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Thank you. Roll call.
I'm sorry, who was the person that second? I didn't hear that.
I did, Jack.
Thank you. Okay, Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Kohler, Vice President Schmidt,
Aye.
and President Russell.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay. Item 11.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go to the next item. It's an amendment to our contract with Miller Pacific for a Pine Mountain Tunnel project. Alex?
Hey, good evening. This afternoon, presenting this item is Jake Miller, and this is just an additional continuation for the geotechnical services with Miller Pacific for the final design of the Pine Mountain Tunnel project. So Jake, go ahead and take it away.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Jake Miller, Associate Engineer in the Design section, and I'm here to present Amendment number 3 to the Professional Services Agreement number 5945 with Miller Pacific Engineering Group for the continued geotechnical engineering services in support of the final design of the Pine Mountain Tunnel Tanks Replacement Project. In April of 2021, staff entered into a professional services agreement with Miller Pacific for the geotechnical engineering services in the support of the preliminary design used to prepare the initial study mitigated negative declaration, the ISMND, along with the mitigation, monitoring, and reporting program, the MMRP, required for the district to proceed with the project pursuant to the California Environmental Quality Act. On December 14th, the Board of Directors adopted the final ISMND and approved the MMRP for the project. On January 4th, the Board of Directors authorized the General Manager to execute an amendment for agreement to commence with the final design and bidding of the project. To proceed with final design under Amendment number 3, Miller Pacific proposes to perform slope stability analysis and deformation analysis of the planned retaining wall and tanks under static and seismic conditions. They will prepare a final design report, performance specifications, and design details for the retaining wall, as well as attend meetings and provide additional consultation. As discussed at the January 4th board meeting, the completion of the final design of the Pine Mountain Tunnel project will assist the district with its efforts to obtain funding from the Department of Water Resources under Urban and Multi-Benefit Drought Relief Grant Program. Staff is requesting the board approve a resolution authorizing the general manager to execute amendment number 3 to the professional services agreement with Miller Pacific Engineering Group to extend the agreement completion date and provide continued geotechnical engineering support in the amount of $33,000 with a staff requested contingency of $5,000 for a total amendment amount of $38,000. Any questions?
Jake, can you summarize the geotech findings? I mean, is there anything extraordinary that we should be aware of up there?
Nothing extraordinary. There's a lot of hard rock that's going to have to be excavated with the earthwork. That's why we're going to be putting in a retaining wall. There's a lot of analysis going into the retaining wall and the backfilling, the partial backfilling of the tanks with the retaining walls and how those are going to relate with each other.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Public comment?
Oh.
Go ahead.
There are
Cynthia.
no,
Okay. Roll call.
I'll second it if it wasn't.
thank you. Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Kohler,
Aye.
Vice President Schmidt,
Aye.
and President Russell.
Aye. Okay, number 12. Certify review of amended final environmental impact report.
Hey, Crystal Yasmin, Director of Engineering. I'm going to take this one. This item was brought to the board at their board meeting on January 18th of 2022. And at the time, the board had a couple questions that they wanted staff to research and report back on. Those two items were the use of recycled water as fire hydrants. And then the second item was reaching out to the State Water Resources Control Board on the requiring dual plumbing to be stubbed out in the residences. So in regards to the first item, we did have a good back and forth conversation with Bob Sinnott, the fire chief for the city of San Rafael, and he brought up a number of issues associated with using recycled water for the hydrants. And I just want to cover a couple of them here tonight. The first one being that, you know, the fire flow improvement fee that's used for improving our system is dedicated towards the potable water system. It's never been used to upgrade the recycled water system for fire flow. Also, while you might think that using purple hydrants would reduce demand and consumption, the water savings from fire events is not considered substantial in terms of reducing that demand. The third item he brought up was that it's a policy matter that he feels needs to be reviewed by the Marin County Fire Chiefs Association first. And we do have a meeting with the Fire Chiefs Association on February 22nd to go over their annual fire flow projects that we'll be moving forward on, but we'll bring this up for discussion at that time as well. Another item he brought up was that the Marin Professional Firefighters Association, the labor group, would have some questions and concerns with using recycled water and would need to have some back and forth discussions and presented data to prove that there's no health risks to them from using the system. Lastly, another item they brought up was that the purple hydrants could affect the ISO ratings for the houses in the area in regards to insurance rates. So we did also look at the
And why would that be? Because we can't make the flow? I mean, just have to put in the pipe.
Right,
We can make 1,500.
Yeah, he had concerns about that. So we did look at the historical tank levels for the recycled water tank in the area. And there are times when the tank level has gotten below the 2-hour, 1,500 gallon per minute minimum required for fighting fires if we were to use recycled water connection. There's a potable water sort of backfeed into the recycled water system. It's a pressure valve that'll open if the recycled water system gets, the demands are too high and pressures are lowered. And that valve is not rated high enough to meet the demand, the 1,500 GPM. We're afraid we're not going to be able to get the 900 to 1,000 gallons per minute on that backup connection from potable.
But we could just make the valve bigger, right?
Right, we could make the valve bigger, but given all of these sort of issues that we need to move to investigate and further explore, staff recommends we go ahead and stick with the potable water fire hydrants in this project. But we will certainly bring it up for discussion with the Fire Chiefs Association at our upcoming meeting. Now let's move on to the question regarding the State Water Board and whether or not we have the authority require dual plumbing that's stubbed out, because the regulation as it reads for the prohibition on dual plumbing is that we are prohibited from delivering recycled water to a single family residence that's dual plumbed. There is, and Larry Bragman, Director Bragman is correct, there's no specific prohibition on whether or not they could actually install dual plumbing in the house. So then it becomes as to the reasonableness of whether or not the district would have, would it be reasonable to require the developer to install dual plumbing, given that the regulations might change at some point in the future and allow for the delivery of recycled water to a single family home. And so we did discuss this with the state, and the state told us that they have no plans to allow recycled water to be delivered, or to change the code to allow recycled water to be delivered to single family residences. So given that there's no intention in the state to change the regs, it seems unreasonable to require the developer to dual plumb and stub it out. So
And
that
what
was
if we planned or asked them to use rainwater for that purpose through a cistern?
for dual plumbing?
Yeah. Well, if you got no other way of using it, if you want to bring it in, it's got to come in through a second system. You can't have it mixed with potable.
Right, I would think that the rainwater would still be considered, non-potable use within the dwelling, and I would think that the state would still not allow that connection to be made because of the chance of a cross connection. Really, that's their concern, is cross connections with the dual plumbed system.
If they were that concerned, Crystal, why do they permit it in condominiums and apartments?
Because we go in and actually inspect. Our inspectors go in and we do water quality tests. We actually take samples. We ensure that they're not cross-connected. We actually have to submit a report to the state when we go to inspect those condos. And so in this case, we don't have that much control over single family homes in terms of going in to inspect the plumbing inside the house.
Well, we certainly would when it comes to construction. I mean, is the department, is Marine Water going to all recycled dual plumb facilities in Marin and inspecting?
We do. And we also periodically double check it. We have to go back every few years and do tracer testing again and recertify with the state that there's no cross connections that have been made. So all those condos that we've required dual plumbing, we do have a process in place for ensuring that.
But Crystal, is that to protect the water district or to protect the user? Because isn't the real issue they're worried about backflow connection into the distribution system?
Right. Yeah. So then it would be for both the protection of the water district and for
maybe. But I mean, where I live in a single family home marina, the folks that have docks have backflow devices required by the district so that they can't bring salt water into the distribution system. So I think the real goal of that is isolating the potential users from the water system more than they are worrying about the potential users contaminating themselves. I think that's where that's the difference. Why we do the inspection is to protect the water system, not to protect the user. I think.
If I could, President Russell, just add to the conversation. In the case of condominiums and particularly high rises, thinking 33 San Pablo is an example where you've got 5 or 6 floors, I think, of apartments. We do actually inspect that system to make sure that there aren't cross connections between the potable system within the building.
Of course.
To ensure, public health is maintained. But of course, we are
equally concerned about potential for backflow into the system. In that particular building, we operate that building at 2 different pressures, one for recycle, one for potable. So we can quickly check and walk into the garage and look at the 2 gauges and quickly check that particular system. But it is, as Crystal was saying, every 4 years, there's a requirement for a shutdown test on buildings like that. And of course, we supply the county jail with recycled water, and that's quite an involved inspection. So a lot of these sites that are dual plumbed have what's called site supervisors, and they're able to manage the system a little bit for us and make sure that the regulations are followed. Whereas in private homes, I'm not saying it's impossible, but the thought process, I think, is that maybe with plumbing changes may be a little more frequent in a private home than they would be in a condominium or apartment setting.
Yeah, and a little more cowboy. I got the image of what's going on. I mean, that's clear, but as Larry Bragman has correctly said, if we don't start somewhere, we're never going to get there. So
we are requiring dual plumbing for condo developments, certainly.
Yeah.
So if I could move on to the actual approval item and what we would ask the board to consider tonight.
Okay.
This is a pipeline extension agreement for a 28 lot residential development in San Rafael off of Lucas Valley Road there. And so we're asking the board to adopt a resolution certifying review of the amended final EIR for the Oakview Master Plan Use Permit Investing Tentative Map for the Talos Reserve Aaron Drive Extension and approving a pipeline extension agreement for the project with the applicant. We also are asking the board to adopt a resolution making determinations respect to fees contained in the pipeline extension agreement. And then lastly, adopt a resolution finding impending peril of gradual earth movement and determining and undertaking appropriate action to halt, stabilize, or abate such peril if it were to happen and exist. So any further board comment?
Just for public information, they are going to be using recycled water for their irrigation. So it's not a complete wash. It's not a complete dodge. So I think it might be worth us sending a letter to the State Water Board and seeing whether we can move the needle. I really don't understand the distinction between condominiums and single family homes, but that may just be me. I mean, there's obviously more experienced people. So
yeah, I think that's really the difference, Larry, that exactly what Paul and Crystal have been talking about is that you have professionals, people in condos aren't going to be redoing their own plumbing, but in houses they are. That's what they're worried about, but it's very paternal in the approach. If you got 2 different colored pipes, it's pretty clear which one is which. So
yeah,
I agree with you completely, though. If we don't start, we're never going to get there.
Yeah. So maybe that's a push on a policy that we should be pursuing. So,
and it may have to wait until December 23 because I think everything's going to be topsy-turvy in December 23 when the DPR gets approved.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments? Public comment?
There are none.
Okay,
Move approval?
that's good. Yes. Do I have a second?
Second.
Roll
And
call.
I'm sorry, are you approving for all 3 resolutions? Okay.
It's like
thank
one
you.
approval item on the agenda.
Okay.
You can do that.
Okay. Director Bragman,
aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
Director Kohler.
Aye.
Oh, and President Russell.
Aye. Okay. Thank you. Item 13.
Okay, and speaking of recycled water, we have Alex here to present the easement with the county of Marin for our recycled water distribution location.
Yeah.
Alex?
Was that me?
It is now, Alex.
Oh, I can take this one. I'm sorry. I saw you on the screen. I thought you had it, but that's fine. I can do this. So this was brought to the Board of Supervisors on just recently. They approved it on January 11th to grant us easement for our new pipeline that feeds the recycled water disbursement area that we set up near the Civic Center. So the easement map is in your packet there. It's pretty straightforward. It allows us, maintenance of that pipeline. So with that, any board questions or comments?
This is basically the reincarnation of what we were doing before. Am I right about that? A few months ago out at Civic Center.
Well, no, the pipeline's already, we installed it. This just grants us easement to maintain it. So
This is a permanent easement for the pipeline that's installed underground. There will still be required a right of entry for operation of the recycled water delivery facility. But this will allow us to leave our pipe there so that it's easier each time we want to reuse the facility.
So we won't necessarily immediately be restarting that.
That's a separate question. I have to defer.
Paul?
Yeah, we actually, that was open last Friday, as I understand, and there were, I think, somewhere on the order of 53 customers who picked up just over 5,000 gallons on 63 trips, something like that. So it was very popular, and we're planning to keep it open one day a week at this point, and we'll move forward.
It gets rave reviews from people who have talked to me about it. So, yeah.
Great. Maybe it's our new spring, Jack.
Yeah.
Our spring water.
Yeah.
No, this is a great thing. And I think the location's great. Now, are we changing the basic way we run the recycled water, that we keep it going all year? Or we're not doing what we used to do to shut it off and put it on domestic water in the winter?
No, I believe we only did that because the treatment plant was under construction and we had to revert to potable.
No, we did it every year. No, we did it every year since I've been on the board, because it was too difficult and there wasn't not enough usage to make it worthwhile to fire up the reclaim plant. But with Las Galinas running it, I presume the water's available if we need it.
It is, and the membrane system makes it easier for them to batch the water, whereas the old filters were a little more challenging because it was a clarification process as well. So stopping and starting that plant wasn't so easy or economical. They are, though, I think Las Galinas is doing some work on their recycled water system. Maybe over the next couple of weeks, I think we may be having to serve potable water as makeup.
I was just curious about what our philosophy was, not whether that's in there today or not.
We're operating all year.
Yeah. The other thing you didn't mention, of course, is taking the water directly from the treated effluent instead of out of the pond, which our whole plant was really designed to remove algae, which complicated things a whole lot, where you cut all that out. So it's much easier and much better quality water that you can make out of the effluent directly. Okay.
President Russell, I just have a question. Is Las Galinas considering building a fill station at their new facility? Does anybody know?
They're very space constrained. We did broach that subject early on, and it's just a very difficult traffic pattern that they would have to manage out there.
How about if we had them put it on the golf course side? I mean, we share a fence with the golf course, right? They do.
Yep.
I think it's an interesting idea if it can work out.
We currently issue, hydrant permits for recycled water fill and so there's a hydrant actually right there next to the Civic Center that has a meter on it. And you can see commercial vehicles pull up and fill their tanks. And so we're the ones, Marin Water issues those permits. So there's a number of hydrants that we have identified for commercial use. So they're just distributed throughout that distribution system.
And we use just an eddy meter that stays on that hydrant. Yeah, that's a very good idea.
Yeah.
And again, I think, Ben, it talks, the gentleman talking about Peacock Gap, it's great to see that they're interested and we're heading that way. You know, as I have said over and over again, when I joined the district, there were 9 potential areas to put the recycled water into. 1 was done. Today, after 17 years, there's 9 potential districts. 1 was done or is done. So, you know, anything we can do to expand that within reason, understanding the cost and especially digging up the streets and all that, it is not cheap to put it in. So that's great to hear.
Right.
Okay. I think
I have one more question.
have at it.
Okay, is the district in communication with CMSA about the Carollo study and coordinating with Carollo?
Yeah, we're actually helping CMSA fund that study. So we are intimately involved.
Good. That's good to hear.
Yeah, until they do figure out their saltwater intrusion, Larry, it's their TDS is very high, like 3,000 or something like that. It's way up there. So until that problem gets resolved, there's going to be difficulty reusing that water. I mean, you know, that was the plan. That's why the shopping center across from the ferries is dual plumbed. That was the idea, was to bring it around or bring it, I don't know, maybe from Ross Valley's plant. I don't know which was actually the plan there, but it never happened. So the whole shopping center sits with dual plumbing, but it never got reclaimed water.
But the amount of salinity is less than bay water, isn't it?
No, it's 1/10, but it's way too salty to use as irrigation without
Well,
desal.
You'd have to do RO.
Yeah,
Okay.
or fix the infiltration. You know, you fix the infiltration, the sewage is okay to reuse. It's the salt water running into their sewer system that's the problem. There's a lot of it. It's an engineering task that can be done, but it's expensive.
Okay.
Okay, this is an action item, so I need a motion.
Move approval. Second.
Roll call.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Kohler,
Aye.
Vice President Schmidt,
Aye.
and President Russell.
Aye. Okay, with that, we have number 14.
Yes, and there are no public comments for that item either.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, and then for number 14, we'll have our 2 meetings this week, the Communications and Water Efficiency meeting tomorrow at 9:30. We'll have also our Operations Committee meeting this Friday at 9:30, and then next week on Thursday, we'll have our meeting on the 24th at 9:30. And then there are a couple of external meetings. They're a little bit further out. The North Bay Water Reuse Authority Board meeting is on Monday, February 28th at 9:30. And then the North Bay Watershed Association meeting is at 9:30 on March 4th. And that's it.
Great. Thank you all. Great comments tonight and an enjoyable meeting.
Yeah,
With that, we'll adjourn.
it was great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you all.